And today we're going to explore the embedded nature of spirituality, how we are more than perhaps what we think we are, how the boundary between ourselves and nature may not be as distinct as we perceive. So to do this, I'm really pleased to welcome Holli-Anne Passmore, from Assistant Professor at Concordia University. I've got a couple of pages, Holly, of this. There's loads. It's ever so exciting. Director of the Multi-University Nature and Meaning Life Research Lab, editor of the International Journal of Wellbeing, Science Chair of the Spirituality and Meaning Division of the International Positive Psychology Association, and invited academic with the Global Wellbeing Initiative and Partnership, Global Wellbeing Initiative, which is a partnership between Gallup World Poll and Wellbeing for Planet Earth Foundation. On top of that, Holli-Anne is a prolific researcher and just a beautiful human being. So I'm really pleased to welcome you here today, Holli-Anne. I'm going to stop sharing my presentation. I shall be in the background if you need me, but I'm going to put my microphone off and
Sounds great. I'm assuming people can hear me. Can someone turn the camera on and give me a thumbs up to make sure that you can hear me okay? Oh, great. Okay, there we go. Thank you. I'm never quite sure with different technologies. So thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Lee. It is just I'm so excited to be here, and it is such an honor to be here with you, with everybody today, and holy moly, especially with such an incredible lineup of people that you have. So I am going to share my screen and give a little talk, and if there's questions along the way, just stick them in the chat. If I can't see them, Lee will let me know, and I'm also going to make very sure that we have a good chunk of time at the end to just chat and have discussion. All right, so let's see if I can do this. Always takes me a second, sorry. All right, so, and I always have to walk my way through this out loud. There we go, share. Okay, I'm assuming the slides are showing okay. Okay, great. Thanks, Lee. All right. So as Lee mentioned, the talk I'm giving today, that we're going to chat about today, is how we can transcend ourselves and also find meaning through connecting with nature, connecting to nature. Those who come to the natural world for meaning will not go away unrewarded. And this quote, written in 1970, has been true throughout our history as a species. Throughout our history, we as humans have turned to nature when we're searching for meaning. I mean, even for example, if you look back at Buddha attained enlightenment by sitting under a fig tree. From the early centuries of the Common Era, we have wandered, people have wandered in them. I'm not that old, people have, not necessarily me. Have wandered in mountains and by streams to contemplate the meaning of life and to search for meaning in life. Viktor Frankl, very famous Austrian psychiatrist, who really was the catalyst for meaning in life research in psychology, wrote of how experiences of natural beauty are one pathway to meaning in life. And numerous philosophers have written of nature experiences as inspiring meaningfulness in our lives. So this very persistent connection between the natural world and our, transcendence and meaning in life really, to me, kind of begs this question of exactly what are the pathways by which nature provides us with a greater sense of meaning in life? So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So first, we kind of need to back up a few steps and talk about what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about meaning in life. So really, the essence of meaning in life is connection. It's a self-transcendence, constituting a connection just to something bigger than yourself. And whether that's to other people, to a group of people, to social movements, It could be connecting to something bigger than yourself through your sense of spirituality or religious or philosophical beliefs. And of course, that also um, relates to what we're going to talk about today. And my area of expertise is the beyond a human natural world. So we are going to dig into exactly how nature, we're going to start with looking how now nature provides us meaning in our lives. And I'm going to split this into sections. So first of all, of course, we're going to look at it as meaning in life and nature in general. But I also want to touch on this tripartite model. So for those of you who might not be familiar, in psychology and in philosophy too, to an extent, but in psych, when we're looking at meaning in life, we really it's really pretty standard now to think that meaning in life is composed of three aspects. And I will explain each of these as we go through. But coherence, a sense of significance or mattering, and a sense of purpose. And purpose, people often use that term synonymously with meaning in life. And really, when we look at the research, it's something separate, it's something part of. And we're going to look at experiential appreciation. Really interesting stuff that Kim and colleagues have recently put out, noting that there's probably a fourth pathway or aspect of meaning in life. So let's just start with meaning in general. In inventories, because really the study of meaning in life kind of started with doing inventories of sources of meaning. Where exactly do people get meaning in life from? And time again, when we look at sources of meaning, the sources of meaning profile or sources of meaning questionnaires or the schedule for meaning in life evaluation. And of course, it's psych, so everybody always has these weird acronyms or for things. But in every single one of these inventories, researchers have found that nature emerges as one of the top sources of meaning in life. Relationships with other people, bar none, of course, is going to be up there. But nature always emerges. Indeed, they've really had to make this a distinct category because participants note this so many times. And oftentimes it's well over 50% of people who note that nature is a major source of meaning in life. When we look at qualitative studies, again, we see very consistently that people are listing meaning in life as a source that people are very consistently noting nature as a source of meaning in life in a number of different demographics. So older adults living in the community, university, just students, just general population. There's a really cool study recently in looking at where do psychologists find meaning in life. And the common themes through in all of these studies, and this wasn't just in one country, this was, well, not surprisingly, North America, but also in Iran, in the UK, in Australia, France, New Zealand, and Sweden. That time and again, people are really listing nature as a major source of meaning. And it's really cool because they describe it as a self-transcendent kind of meaning. And that's an important aspect, right? That aspect of coming out of yourself. And as well on a global level, I'm presenting some research actually on this at the World Conference of Positive Psych in Vancouver this summer, and there'll be a paper coming out on that relatively shortly, maybe in the fall. We know on a global basis, because we've now asked about nature connectedness and meaning on a global basis, and we again see this link there. Quantitative studies, randomized controlled studies, again, support this aspect of nature and meaning in life. So this is where participants are randomly assigned to engage in some kind of nature thing or a control condition. And these are actually showing that this is boosts. If you do that, that your meaning and life levels are boosted significantly in a number of different studies. Studies where people have spent more time in nature. Studies also in where it's not about time, and these are, we'll talk about this more at the end. This is a series of studies I've run with well over 1,000 people by now. I don't know, maybe 1,200. Even just noticing how everyday nature makes you feel. spending 15 minutes in an inside room, but with plants in the room, or even watching nature videos. Some colleagues of mine in China did that. All of these show significant boosts to your levels of meaning in life. We also know that nature connectedness is correlated with meaning. And I just want to take a minute because people conflate these all the time. So think of it this way. Think of this as a social relationship. I could ask you, how much time do you spend with other people? And you would give me an answer. But what that wouldn't tell me is what's the quality of your relationship with those people? How much do you feel, to what degree do you feel connected to those other people? Now we might get a very different answer. Now we might get, oh, I spent a ton of time around other people, but I'm not connected to any of them. Or you might get, I don't really spend that much time with people, but I'm super connected to the people that are across the world or that I do spend time with. That's the same difference between time in nature and nature connectedness. Time in nature, of course, is a good thing. That's just simply spend exposure to nature, time in nature, watching nature videos, plants in your house. Nature connectedness is a construct, and it's about the subjective sense of connection with the natural world. And we can have a bigger conversation about what this actually means. But that really is just, how connected do you feel to the natural world? How much is that a part of who you are? So when we look at that construct of nature connectedness in a number of studies, including several of mine and meta-analyses, we know that that's a significant correlate of meaning in life. So it's not just about time in nature, it's also feeling connected to nature that provides people with this sense of meaning in life. So that's nature and meaning generally. So now let's dig into all those aspects of meaning. And oddly, I'm going to start with the fourth aspect first, but that's the newest one that's been proposed. That's experiential appreciation. And Kim and colleagues talked about this as appreciating the beauty of life by valuing and being present to the moments of one's life experiences. And this is quite a recent paper, it's maybe 4 or 5 months old now, where they propose that this is really another aspect to meaning. And one of the ways that they found that they tested this theory about experiential appreciation was by randomly assigning people to watch an awe-inspiring nature video. And what they found was that awe-inspiring nature elicits an enhanced experiential appreciation. So people are suddenly appreciating life more, and that is leading to greater meaning in life. It was really kind of cool when I started investigating this, because that aspect of appreciation of life has been noted before. This is way back, like in '99, as a top source of meaning in life. But really germane to what we're talking about here today is how people describe that source of meaning, of appreciation of life, because they described it almost purely by nature, plants, trees, birds, the sounds of birds, the sea, a brooklet. You get this whole appreciation of life and nature as a top source of meaning. Many writers in many different disciplines, psychology, philosophy, have written about how nature experiences enhance your sensory perception and also give people really intense emotional experiences. This, of course, ties to a theory called the biophilia hypothesis, and that is proposing, and there's a ton of research on this, but proposes that we have this innate, because of evolution, innate propensity, I guess, tendency to respond to emotional intensity with nature. So all of this really ties together this aspect of experiential appreciation being a major pathway to meaning in life, and very much tied to experiences in nature. All right, so let's dig into now the sort of 3 standard, or what's been considered standard now, aspects of meaning. So first of all, let's look at coherence. So when we're talking about coherence with respect to meaning in life, we're really talking about an intuitive feeling or a cognitive understanding, essentially that the world makes sense. We do this by identifying with elements of things that are permanent or stable. And coherence is also about the world makes sense, I make sense, and my place in the world makes sense, that it's coherent, and that you fit within that bigger scheme. I think one of the best ways that I ever heard coherence and meaning in life described was actually by Logan George and Crystal Park. And just that sense that things are as they ought to be. That's about coherence. That's a sense of meaning. So even in this time of climate change and climate crises, there's still this really deep sense of permanency and patterns that exist in nature. Every single day, the sun still rises in the east and it still sets in the west. It's spring. Shoots are pushing up through the ground. Not quite so much here. I'm in Edmonton, Alberta. We're relatively far north. But I know that in the UK there, particularly around Derby where I was, there's probably masses of daffodils everywhere, right? That still happens every single spring. We still have spring, summer, fall, and winter. The order of the pattern of the order of the seasons is still there, even in these kind of bizarre times. And indeed, this aspect of non-randomness, of patterns, of regularities, of unity, these are just this inherently part of the physical forces that shape the natural world. And you can see these in snowflakes. You can see these in sand ripples. There's a pattern to them always, clouds and mountain cliffs. And these deep patterns in nature, we know that observing and reflecting on these natural patterns really provides us with a sense of comfort and a sense that the world makes sense, coherence, that aspect of meaning. The natural world is built upon common motifs and patterns. Recognizing patterns in nature creates a map for locating yourself in change and anticipation of what is yet to come. We know empirical research looking particularly in the clinical field, so clinical studies, people working with practitioners, working with clients, that when, as people like Berger and McLeod and George Burns from Australia, that when you integrate nature into your therapy practice, whether this is just kind of tangentially taking, exposing people to nature, or if you're really using nature as a co-therapist, that really helps people give a sense of meaning to their life, and it starts to help making sense. Using nature metaphors is incredibly effective as a practitioner because it puts things in perspective, right? It goes back to this aspect of locating yourself in change. Locating yourself, and we'll talk about that as well, as part of something bigger. And 2019 study found that we're back to nature connectedness, that construct that correlates with many different aspects of coherence, with comprehensibility, with a sense of manageability, and of course with meaningfulness. So moving on to the next aspect of meaning in life, the next major aspect of meaning, and that's a significance sometimes called mattering. And this is kind of just like it sounds, right? This is referring to thinking that your life just simply has inherent value, that you matter, that you belong, that you matter and belong and are significant at an individual, social, at a human level, right? That if you died, somebody would care, somebody would notice. This also relates to significance and mattering at a cosmic level. And here's where we get into kind of like a grand level, a spirituality and transcendent kind of level. So let's start with social mattering. So Evie Peterson and colleagues wrote this really cool article where they talked about how there's common emotions that underpin social connectedness and nature connectedness, that there's a commonality between feeling socially connected and feeling connected to nature. And there's a bunch of research that supports this. And we'll just want to talk about this for a minute, because I think it's really important and interesting, of course, to understand. So again, that construct of nature connectedness, some of this is my research, some of this is, of course, is other people's, but we see time and time again that nature connectedness correlates with social well-being when you measure it on many different ways. We know from people like Francis Q, Orban, many people looking at green space in neighborhoods. The more green space there is in a neighborhood, and we're talking even just like trees on the street, not necessarily a park, but the more green space in a neighborhood, the greater the strength of social ties in that neighborhood. That's a very robust finding, a very consistent finding. All of this has led to something called nature-based social prescribing. And this is things like for people who might be struggling a bit with whatever issues, prescribing something like being involved with community gardening, going to the farmer's market. I thought that was a really interesting one, because both of those things, community gardening or farmer's market, both have very intimately involved with nature, and it's a very social aspect. And when you connect those two through this nature-based social prescribing, you boost social connections, you boost meaning in life, you're boosting this significance mattering aspect. And of course, all the incredible work by Dr. Keltner and Paul Piff. And if you haven't read Dr. Keltner's new book on awe, wow, you got to read it. It's a fantastic book. And certainly a huge chunk of that book talks about how awe-inspiring nature boosts social connections. What about cosmic mattering, spirituality aspects? So now we're referring to the sense of belonging to something vast. So, of course, a social movement is something bigger than just you, but we're talking here something really vast. This is the best way I can think of describing it. A sense of, and also a sense of something, that there exists something greater than yourself. So here too, we see a bunch of supportive evidence, and you might not have even thought of these. I think these are interesting concepts just to think about as you go through life and have different experiences. A bunch of research looking at, that's a technical term, by the way, a bunch of research. I write much better than I speak, honestly. But a bunch of research actually reports on speaking about sources of meaning. And so many participants would report their connection with nature, and they describe it as a connection with cosmic meaning. Like, that's not something that you go through your day saying, yeah, I connected with cosmic meaning. But people do that when they're talking about experiences with nature. In a number of studies that I have run, noticing how nature makes you feel, and even noticing good things in nature boosts what I call the transcendent connectedness. And transcendent connectedness is measured by a feeling connected to other people, to the natural world, and just really to life in general. We know that nature connectedness is intimately connected with spirituality. So it's kind of hard to find a measure of spirituality that doesn't actually include an item of nature in that scale. We know from many, not just researchers, but philosophers, literature, people who write literature, writing how nature triggers these really intense spiritual experiences. And of course, throughout our history, really, and if you look at many indigenous cultures, nature is really written about and spoken about and experienced as an embodiment of spirituality. And this aspect is really important when we look at the significance mattering aspect, because Michael Prinzing, who's a philosopher who has done some work with Barbara Fredrickson in psychology, just put out this, does absolutely fascinating work, and super nice guy too. But this really interesting paper looking at how this aspect of spirituality and cosmic mattering is probably one of the deepest connections and important aspects to meaning in life that we can have. So some really deep roots when we're looking at this. And so what about the last aspect? And that's purpose. Purpose is about having really core goals and aims in life. And this is beyond, something that gets you out of bed in the morning, more than the fact that you have to go to the bathroom, or more than the fact that you have stuff to do today. These are really core goals and aims in your life, the big kinds of things. But when you think about it, understanding your purpose in life that leads to meaning, understanding that you have to have time for self-reflection. You have to have physical space, but you have to have a mental space in order to do that and reflect on that, to really be able to find your different purposes and meaning in life. And I love this quote by Kaplan and Kaplan, that experiences in nature tend to elicit reflections on one's life, reflections on your priorities and possibilities, on your actions and one's goals. And they wrote this before there was a ton of research on this, but now there's research has certainly backed this up. When you look at, again, qualitative research, natural spaces are notably preferred, notably mentioned as a place to engage in self-reflection. And in a place when you randomly assign people to spend some time in nature, their ability to self-reflect actually becomes greater, and significantly greater if you're talking stats. There's also been a number of studies on farm-based therapy programs or green care-based therapy programs. And one of the very consistent findings that's come out of this research is that, of course, they're going to, therapy is going to help. But over and above that, this aspect that it was involved with nature, that people really mentioned that aspect specifically helped them regain a sense of self and help them regain the ability to self-reflect. And if you don't have that, it's really kind of hard to connect to your purpose in life or purposes in life. So this is kind of an indirect route, but a very important route, and link between nature and meaning in life, this ability to self-reflect. If we take an even bigger step back and we look at what does purpose mean, it's Dr. Frank Martella, great new book. I'm not getting paid for these plugs, by the way. There's just all these great books that have come out, and Frank Martella is such an amazing researcher and person. His new book about It's a Wonderful Life, and if you Google him, there's some videos on it too, but he talks about kind of his 2-sentence answer. And Frank's particularly fascinating, I think, because, just aside from who he is, but just he has a PhD in philosophy and in psychology. So he's got this great mix of ideas and thinking. And he talks about meaning in life as doing actions that are meaningful to you in a way that's also meaningful to other people. And that's what we're kind of talking about when we're talking about purpose here, connecting your actions to a meaningful and purposeful whole. And one of the ways that you can do that we're going to spend just a few minutes talking about here, is how you can make meaning in your life by engaging in nature activities, nature enhancing activities, and nature protective activities. We're really talking about giving back, about beneficence. In self-determination theory, there's 3 basic psychological needs that you have to have these needs met in order to really meet to be a flourishing individual. A need for autonomy, and autonomy is just simply, really feeling that you're making the decisions in your life. A need for competence, and a need for relatedness. And Frank Martella and Richard Ryan and Ed DC a few years ago also put forth that beneficence is one of these basic psychological needs. And there is evidence, and Frank Martella and Mike Steger also put forth that beneficence is also a really important aspect of meaning in life. Giving back, having a pro-social impact, right? Contributing to the larger world. That's really incredibly central to meaning in life. So pro-social actions and goals and objectives that are really going beyond one's personal needs. And of course, one of the ways that you can do that we're going to talk about now, how nature, because before we were talking about nature providing meaning, now we're going to look at nature making meaning. And one of the ways you can do that is through committed actions for nature. And we're talking the whole gamut here: pro-environmental activities, gardening, recycling, use of environmentally friendly products, energy saving practices, right? Reducing your carbon footprint, but also helping with biodiversity. That's where gardening comes in. Nature-based volunteering, and of course, involvement in nature-based or climate crises movements in a constructive manner. There are some movements that maybe aren't quite doing that in a really constructive manner. But all of this, these committed actions for nature, is one way that you can help make meaning in your life through a nature pathway. And indeed, there are meta-analytic findings. So that's meta-analyses, if you're not familiar with that, just in case, are really a whole pile of studies, and then you do a study on the whole pile of studies. So a bunch of research again, clearly robust link between a pro-environmental behavior and having meaning in life. We know, well, this is such a solid finding that often gets ignored, kind of drives me nuts. The biggest, bar none, the biggest predictor of pro-environmental behavior is nature connectedness. It's not knowledge. Of course, you need knowledge in order to help you know a way to do that. But it's actually nature connectedness. And we're going to come back to that in a minute, because that's the biggest aspect of predicting pro-environmental behavior. But if you combine all of this, and if you look at studies of not just people who are, really hardcore environmentalists, but just everyday people. Well, some of you may be hardcore environmentalists, but everyday people who, like myself and like Lee, and I'm sure some of the others here, where you just go through your life and you think of this, your lifestyle is about committing to nature. And studies looking at why people do that, people really know that that's because that driver is because it provides meaning to people's lives. Those goals, those actions provide a really strong sense of meaning. Community gardeners often talk about how they're doing something useful for other people. They're making a difference to other people and to the planet as a whole. And when you kind of combine all these research and look at the underlying themes, two big ones. One that comes that committed actors for nature talk about a life-directing desire to make a difference in the world. And when we think about this, right, a life direction, that's the purpose aspect of meaning in life. To make a difference in the world, that's the significance and mattering aspect of meaning in life. And then people, committed actors for nature, or people where, that's part of your lifestyle, very much in different studies, this theme of a really active awareness of the need for actions to fit into the greater life story. And here's we're talking about, this is coherence. This goes back to those clinical and the practitioners, clinical studies and practitioners that talk about using nature metaphors, making your life fit into the bigger scheme. That's coherence. And again, committed actors for nature as well. This is coming up. We got a pretty big problem on our hands here, though, because nature is quite threatened. And when you threaten nature the way that it is threatened right now, that's also a big hit to people's meaning in life. You might remember I spoke about how a sense of coherence has been described as that things are as they ought to be. But things are not as they ought to be with the natural world. We know that right now, today, 1 million plants and animals are threatened with extinction, and that the extinction rate is accelerating at an unprecedented rate, at a rate that's 10 to hundreds of tens times faster than it has ever been over the last 10 million years. We see those deep patterns in nature that provide us with a sense of coherence and comfort and meaning. We know those are noticeably disrupted. And of course, we're seeing widespread degradation of biodiversity and of ecosystems. And when that happens, quite a few studies are showing, and more, of course, are showing how people who live in severely degraded natural environments, that's a real hit to their sense of significance, their sense of mattering, that life itself even doesn't matter, let alone your own life. We know that issues around climate crises, climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, that really brings to the surface these questions of meaning, questions of meaninglessness. And it sparks for many people a search for meaning and a search for significance. Mike Steger, way back in 2012, wrote that meaning in life is the web of connections, understandings, and interpretations that help us comprehend our experience. But that web of connection is now frayed and broken with climate and ecological disruptions, and our lives seem less connected, they seem less significant, and they seem less meaningful. We get this problem between nature connectedness and eco-anxiety. We know these are positively correlated. I've done a bunch of research on this. I keep saying a bunch. I really am quite a good writer. I'm just apparently not very erudite when I speak. And this makes sense, right? This tension between nature connectedness and eco-anxiety. We're going to hurt when we care about something. But you can take this and turn this to a good. You can become a committed actor for nature. And these are what's called, Susan Clayton and Badzuski, Molinario will call these meaning-focused and really constructive strategies for not just reconnecting to nature, but enhancing meaning in life, enhancing the meaning in your life, the significance of purpose, your coherence. In a way that's connected to nature, by engaging in pro-environmental behavior, by engaging in pro-nature conservation behaviors, and by fostering your connection with nature. Naomi Klein is a really big environmentalist, and one of her quotes that I absolutely love was when she was talking about how it's imperative, it's vital that we connect with nature in ways that are not all about peril. Right? You don't want to get so consumed with environmental issues that are really hard to read about, that you miss the beauty of the day, you miss the beauty of the daffodils, you miss the beauty of nature around you. You need to keep fostering that sense of connection with nature to help drive your pro-environmental behavior. But just because at a basic level, it's good for you, it makes you feel happy and transcendent and connected and gives you a sense of meaning. So how can we do that? I'm going to briefly talk for 3 minutes here because I want to leave lots of time for questions and just open discussion. How can we connect to nature? How can we do that? Well, certainly one of the ways to do that is Ryan Lumber, a wonderful colleague of mine from the UK. He's done some brilliant research looking at pathways to nature connectedness. And these pathways include using your senses, using your emotions, just noticing the beauty in nature. One of the pathways is meaning itself. What are the meaningful experiences in nature? What symbolism does it have for you? And also, of course, compassion and care for nature. And if you're interested in this, there's it's a MOOC, what is that? A massive open online course for nature connectedness, for a new relationship with nature that I helped to develop with Ryan Lumber and with Miles Richardson at the University of Derby. And I'll share these slides with Lee. He can share them with anybody, or you can just contact me. And of course, if you just Google this, you'll find it as well. And then the last way is an intervention that I developed that I spoke about before, and it's been very honored that it's been part of the Greater Good in Action website for science-based ways to add meaning to your life. This is a really simple intervention. It's this simple. It's just notice how the everyday nature you encounter in your daily routine makes you feel. That's the whole intervention. And the first time I did this, I had people taking photos, but I've done it a bunch of times in Canada and the States, in China, I think in all different seasons, including winter when it was minus 30 Celsius here in Edmonton. And this really basic thing, this isn't about more time in nature. This is just in your everyday routine. Just notice how it makes you feel. And one of the very incredibly consistent findings that's come up from this is that people feel this sense of transcendent connectedness significantly more than in any other condition. Connection to other people, a connection to nature, a connection to life itself. So just to wrap up here, we know that if we go back in history again, where we started, in the old reality of biblical times, right? People really depended on the earth, on nature they found around them for life and for meaning. And today, despite that we really mostly have a pretty urban lifestyles centered around technology, which sometimes is good, otherwise we couldn't all be here today. But we still rely on nature for life. Nature dies, we're going to die. And we still find meaning in the natural world. We still turn to nature as a source for meaning in our lives. We still turn to nature to find comfort and coherence in patterns and elements of permanency. We seek out nature as a place to foster meaningful connections with other people and with the sacred, as a place to reflect on our goals and our purposes in life. And of course, we also turn to nature and find great joy in appreciating the beauty of nature in all of its myriad of forms, and how that awakens our greater experiential appreciation of life. We turn to nature for meaning. Because at its essence, meaning is about connection. It's about relationships, and it's about relating to something larger than outside of ourselves. And Simon James worded this really well. I loved this analogy that he expanded on this, and he used the example of explaining the meaning of a particular sequence of notes. By themselves, okay, but the meaning really comes about by how do those notes fit into the greater symphony to which they belong. And perhaps ultimately our search for meaning is a search for how we fit into the larger symphony of life, how we fit into the symphony of the natural world, which we are a part of. Because meaningful lives that have no connection with the natural world are very hard to imagine. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing and let's chat.
Oh, Holli-Anne, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm just drinking that in at the moment. It's absorbing into me. I hope I'm speaking on behalf of everyone, but that was truly beautiful.
Thank you.
Some things that resonated with me today. This week, the British naturalist Chris Packham said everybody has to stand up for nature at this point in time. In a sense, I think putting this master's course together is a way in which I feel I'm able to stand up for nature and take part. I get a sense from what you were talking about that we're catching up with some of the great poets and writers in our understanding of our relationship with nature, that it's not the quantity, it is the quality. And one of the themes that came through strongly for me there was mindfulness around nature. But I'm also interested, as we're learning more about intelligence in nature and how we're realizing that nature is far more intelligent than we perceived. I wonder what role there is also for imagination and creativity in connecting with nature. And I just wondered if there's any points you'd like to pick up on that before I ask everybody else for their questions.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, one of the courses I teach a nature and well-being course at university here, but I also teach a course on emotions and behavior, and I also teach intro psych. Pretty much everything I teach, I throw nature into there. I sneak it into the course curriculum. But when I was talking about nature, emotions, and emotions and behavior, and just when you're talking about intelligence, how Frans de Waal, so sort of the great biologist and primatologist, I love Frans de Waal's stuff, and he one of his recent books is called "Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are?" And I think that's a profoundly moving book. And I think that really speaks to this larger issue of understanding the intelligence of nature, certainly of other kinds of animals, other kinds of life, because we are just animals. We just happen to be Homo sapiens sapiens, but we are basically just animals, right? From an evolutionary perspective. But the intelligence of other animals, of other forms of life, of the patterns of nature. I think I can't remember his first name. His last name is Ball. It's a 2016 book about patterns in nature. It's a fascinating book. And if you look at aspects of biophilic design, for example, and the intelligence of the ecosystem of how nature deals with life and with different symbiotic relationships, there's so much, we know a fair bit, but there's so much more that we don't know. And I think I love that you mentioned that, Lee, because I think that's a really important aspect for us to respect that and to find out more, to go back to Indigenous peoples and Indigenous knowledge, and to look to the philosophers. Like in psych, we know a lot of stuff. We do a pretty good job, but wow, are we siloed and we miss out on those other kinds of aspects.
Thank you ever so much. I'm just opening up the microphones for the people, so if there are more questions, that was multitasking there. I can do it occasionally. So, yeah, thank you for that beautiful answer there. So opening it up to anybody else, please, any questions that you'd like to ask Holli-Anne?
So can I come in at this point, Lee? So thank you, Holli-Anne. Appreciate that. I'm one of Lee's colleagues at the university. I'm just looking through some of the comments coming through into the Q&A. And one particular one then was about, well, actually, I'm looking at the timings of some of this, but in fact, one of my own questions is, in terms of then recent work, you mentioned you're presenting some of this work at the International Positive Psychology Association conference, IPA, in Canada later this year. The particular work there, what do you see as this kind of opportunity with positive psychology and other areas of psychology? That do you see this as an extension of what's already been out there, a merging of psychology with a lot of other areas of related work? And I'm partly asking, what's that work particularly you're going to be presenting at the conference that you've touched upon this evening?
Right, great. Thank you so much. And just the one name that popped up here was Piers Worth. Holy smokes, that's such an honor that you're here. It is for everybody. It was like, oh my goodness. I can't see any of the questions in the chat, so maybe afterwards you can just copy them and paste them for me. But so yeah, so the IPA conference, this was, I mean, I can't lie, this was also kind of a bucket list thing for me to get invited to speak. But quite honestly, beyond just, it's a great CV line item, realistically, I was so pleased because I had been lobbying IPA for a number of years. Yes, I can submit a talk, and yeah, the chances are if I submit a talk, it's going to get accepted, or a symposium. That is not the same as having a plenary talk. And I was invited, and then I invited John Zielinski, and we have a panel. One of the invited plenary panels that we're doing is exactly about this, is nature, connectedness, and well-being. And the thing that speaks, so that's one thing, and then I'll speak to the other things that I'll be presenting at IPA in Vancouver in July. But to me, I was so pleased, because what that says is that the biggest organization on well-being and positive psych is throwing its weight behind and saying, you know what? This nature thing is actually something really important that we need to look at. So on the panel, what we're going to be talking about are just general questions. Really, we have there's 5 of us on the panel, different experts in different areas of it, including some practitioners, an Indigenous individual who's also a researcher. We're going to be looking at exactly how does nature enhance well-being, and what is the connection? Because I think that a lot of psychologists, well, of course, to me, this seems second nature because I spent like a whole pile of years now looking at this. I think positive psychology, frankly, still really kind of misses the boat on this. They're starting to understand, starting to look at it, but not understanding the depth of the science behind it. And there's a lot of focus on time and nature. And I am in no way dissing time and nature. I am saying that it is beyond just time and nature. It's the quality, it's what you notice. And I always use it this way, and I'm running some studies, hopefully this summer on this, but you know, there's a difference. If you think of it this way in a university class, you have 2 students. 2 students come to every single class. One student pays attention, they're engaged. Yeah, sometimes, right, they maybe look at their phone once in a blue moon, but for the most part, they're really engaged. You have the other student who, for the most part, they are on their phone or they're sleeping. Who do you think is going to get more out of that university class? Same thing with nature. So that's one, the big panel. Also presenting some Gallup World Poll findings on another symposium panel with Tim Lomas and some other really amazing people, where these are findings from the Global Wellbeing Initiative, where for well-being as a whole, but also in particular on nature connectedness. I'm super excited and honored to be part of that. Part of a panel on character strengths with Eunoia Nemec and some other people who are, because we've been doing research on practical interventions involving mindfulness and character strengths and nature, with some research we haven't yet published yet, partly because I haven't finished analyzing all the data, quite a bit of it though. I'm getting also talking about some nature interventions, the Noticing Nature one, 3 good things in nature, but ones where we've compared them to the most common positive psych intervention, 3 good things, and showing how, of course, all of this boosts well-being, but as soon as you add nature in, you suddenly got transcendent connectedness. You suddenly have this composite emotion of elevation, which is elevation and wonder and gratitude mixed together. And I can feel myself smiling already. I think what I'm most excited about probably of all of that is I have a number of students presenting a talk. One student is presenting a talk looking at from research we did in Germany. Another student is a couple students doing posters on that. So my goal in that one is taking advantage of naturing up the hell out of that conference, frankly. Very long answer to that question. Sorry, Matthew.
I want to say a wonderful answer, and it looks like they're going to get you're giving value for money at that conference. You are being, you're going to be, it's actually so the way you're really naturing it up. Fantastic that, and I've put into the chat at least one of the sessions I think you're involved with there, so people can find out more information about that. Mindful of the time and just noticing, I can see Romy's got a camera open, but she's put something into the chat. I'm not sure what to add to it as well. Noting that thing about the emotional impact urban architecture has on well-being and how we can work with nature rather than manipulating and carving up the landscape. So maybe any thoughts about linking this nature connectedness with the built environment, how we get the best out of those kinds of combinations.
Exactly. That's an excellent point. And I think one of the things, the population that I worry about most is a population of people who are homeless. Because often that's in parts of the city that really doesn't have a lot of nature. And that's a problem. And I think that in general, if we look to biophilic architecture and biophilic design, and some of this stuff is really basic, like, man, plant some trees along the street. Like, even that simple aspect, there's so much research showing how that improves people's longevity, their physical health, obviously their physical health and longevity, but different aspects of well-being and social well-being. even if you control for diagnoses like cancer and major depression, and if you control for gender, that still makes a difference. So I think there's some really simple ways to do that. And I think one of the ways that we can all do that is think about who we're voting for when we're looking at civic elections. I think that part gets missed. So great point. And also should mention too, I don't seem to have access to the chat, but I have a lot of, I've spoken about some of these in other talks, and I've posted them all on my website at nature-mill.org. People can check it out, or you can just email me.
Absolutely, Holli-Anne. We'll point people to Nature Mill and in the emails and stuff that we're sending out. So absolutely. And if there are any further questions that people want to share, please share through us. They can get into contact with us at Buckingham New University website for the MA in Spirituality and Ecology and Mental Health. So, you know, it was a real partnership. As I say, I feel like you're a friend of our university, so it is an incredible pleasure. I'm going to try and keep us to time. It's 7 o'clock, and I know people book up to these on the allocated time spaces, but from everybody, thank you very, very much. It was a beautiful talk, heartfelt, and lovely to have your energy and presence with us. So I'm going to give you a real clap.
Oh, thank you so much. This was just such so exciting and just such an honor. And thank everybody there. This is your, it's noon for me, but this is your dinner hour or supper hour, whatever you call it. So thank you so much for investing your time. And please